Shangri-La. The name alone conjures up all sorts of images of faraway lands filled to the brim of mystique and allure. But what is the truth about this mysterious city? Is it even real? My name is World Proven and I'm off to prove what is the truth about Shangri-La. I'll see you near Tibet. What is called Shangri-La is actually the Chinese city of Shangrila in Yunnan province. Or is it? To understand more about Shangri-La, we need to go back to 1933 and then further back to 1844. In the novel Lost Horizon by English author James Hilton, Hilton portrays Shangri-La as a mystical, harmonious valley enclosed in the western end of the Kunlun Mountain, which is a real mountain chain and constitutes one of the longest mountain chains in Asia around the Tibetan plateau. Sometime after the novel, Shangri-La has become synonymous with any earthly paradise, particularly a mythical Himalayan utopia, an enduringly happy land, isolated from the world. In Hilton's novel, the people who live in Shangri-La are almost immortal, living hundreds of years beyond the normal lifespan. But did James Hilton base Shangri-La off a real Chinese city, one that might even be located very close to what is today called Shangrila? In a 1936 interview with the New York Times, Hilton states that he used, quote, Tibetan material, unquote, from the British Museum, particularly the travel log of two French priests who traveled round trip from Beijing and Lhasa between 1844 and 1846. This travel path would have taken them very close to present-day Shangrila in the Yunnan province of China. So my search of Shangri-La begins in a Beijing Starbucks. Not because the Beijing Starbucks has anything to do with Shangri-La or Shangrila, but because this is just where I'm launching off from. Going to fly Beijing to Nanchang. There is nothing in Nanchang, so we're gonna get right out of there and go to Yunnan. So Yunnan is where we're gonna find James Hilton's Shangri-La or Shangrila, if it exists at all. Got 2.5 hour flight to Nanchang, and then a 5-hour layover, which I'm not even going to leave the airport because Nanchang is just nothing to see. I've been to Nanchang a few times and not a lot there. And then we got 2.5 hour flight to Yunnan. We're starting in Kunming just because it's the capital of Yunnan. And from there, Shangrila and also some other areas in search for James Hilton's Himalayan utopia. Tomorrow I will be off to Shangri-La or Shangrila in China, but I want to take a second to consider other locations in Yunnan as the location for James Hilton's Shangri-La. So I am considering Xishuangbanna in Yunnan. Yunnan is a province in China. Yunnan is one of China's southernmost provinces, and Banna is Yunnan's southernmost county. It's only some 100 kilometers from the Myanmar border. Banna is home to the Dai people, as well as many other minorities. It is also an area that has been heavily influenced by Burmese and Thai culture. Yunnan also borders Tibet to the northwest, which is important. So here's why I think it's a possible fit for James Hilton's Shangri-La. The first is Yunnan is a province that I suspect influenced James Hilton. The second reason is Hilton spoke of a Buddhist utopia, and Banna is one of China's most devoutly Buddhist counties. The Dai people largely practice Theravada Buddhism. Banna also has stunning wats, pagodas, monasteries that were built in the 12th century, and they're very impressive. And I can see it feeling like a Buddhist utopia. The third reason is what Hilton describes as a lush green valley separated from the rest of the world. Banna has this vibe. The reason is it's surrounded by lush rainforest, not part of this world feeling, as the rainforests act as sort of a natural buffer from the rest of the world. The last reason is a little less persuasive, but I'm going to mention it anyways. The Dai people in Yunnan, China have always worn very colorful clothing. Bright reds, yellows, golds, whites, blues. This would have made a very colorful village for any outsider. I can't imagine that a land described as heaven on earth would come with people dressed in drab clothing. Seeing the Dai people and the other minorities in Yunnan under the backdrop of a tropical rainforest in the background, wearing their brightly colored clothes, would have been an impressive sight. Now I'll talk about some of the things that don't fit with James Hilton's Shangri-La. First, the type of Buddhism practiced in Banna is a problem. In researching Lost Horizon, Hilton himself relied heavily on Tibetan Buddhist materials, particularly the writings of two French priests that traveled within Tibet and possibly present-day Yunnan. Tibetan Buddhism, compared to Theravada Buddhism, is very different, and they really can't be mistaken for each other, at least their buildings. The Theravada Buddhist buildings that exist in Banna are the buildings that we more commonly see in Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. We don't traditionally see these in China, and we definitely don't see them in Tibet. A good example of Tibetan Buddhist buildings would be the Potala Palace. The Theravada Buddhist buildings are really quite different from something like the Potala Palace. The second reason relates to the Kunlun Mountains. The big problem is the Kunlun Mountains don't go through Banna. In fact, you can't see the Kunlun Mountains from Banna. Banna is not surrounded by tall mountains. This point alone excludes Xishuangbanna as the location of James Hilton's Shangri-La. The whole idea of Shangri-La being a Himalayan utopia only works with grand, tall mountains in a valley. This is a green, lush valley, but it's not surrounded by grand Himalayan mountains. As such, Shangri-La could decidedly not be Xishuangbanna. The reason being, it's not a utopia surrounded by Himalayan mountains. That's my opinion. Let's check out Shangri-La or Shangrila. So it's kind of interesting. Right away, Shangrila claims to be Shangri-La. So if you look right above the airport there, Shangrila. In Chinese it says Shangrila. So kind of funny because the city kind of claims right away, hey, we're Shangri-La. But James Hilton himself declaring that it's fictitious. So I think we need to dig in a little bit more than the airport sign as to whether this is James Hilton's Shangri-La. I will say, coming from southern Yunnan, it goes down about 40 degrees as soon as you land in Shangri-La. But of course, we're about 3,000 meters up, so it's quite a bit colder. So I'm in the old town of Shangri-La, Dukasong. I'm here because I have a view of the valley. This is the valley here, you can see. There's actually a really sad story to this. So Shangri-La has 1,400 years of history. It's one of the oldest Tibetan cities. And in January of 2014, this entire village burnt down. So 90% of Dukasong burned to the ground, and the fire lasted for 10 hours. So the world lost a very old city, 1,400 years of Tibetan history, and I don't know how much we lost that was, still existing from, 400 AD or whatever, but the world certainly lost something that was very cool and very old, and it's very sad. So I'm in the old city of Shangri-La, or Shangrila, and using the old city as sort of an example of what James Hilton would have based Shangri-La off in the book Lost Horizon is not really fair, and there's a few reasons for this. So I am going to cover the old town a little bit, but okay, why it's not really fair just to base the old town off what James Hilton was inspired to write Shangri-La. This isn't what the old town was when James Hilton was researching for Lost Horizon. So like stuff like this it's new. I mean, it looks old, maybe, You know, it looks like it could be turn of the century, something like that. But it's not, because as I said in an earlier video, Shangrila burnt to the ground. 90% of what was Shangrila is gone. It's just gone. When they rebuilt Shangrila, they tried to replicate what Shangrila was. There's always been people taking pictures here, and I don't get it. That must say something in Tibetan, because every time I walk by this, and I've walked by like 10 times, there's like people lined up waiting to get their picture taken out. I don't know what it says. There should be the lamb ladies around here too. There's people lambing. they sell lambs. Well, they rent lambs. You hold them and I don't know. It looks like you're in Shangri-La. So this isn't the old town that James Hilton would have saw. Say James Hilton was actually here. The narrow streets, the general layout, sure. I mean, I think it's fair to say that this is like an okay representation of what it was. A great representation? I don't think so. Or a perfect rendition. So that's the first bit. The second bit is, I don't think James Hilton, when he was researching this in person and both reading Tibetan materials, I don't think he'd be in the town centers. I think he had the idea that he wanted to write about a Himalayan utopia, and he found areas that were Himalayan utopias. Elevation would have been higher. A town center is not really where you would consider a Himalayan utopia, is it? He would have sought out the Buddhist monasteries. He would have sought out the sort of mountain escapes, the mountain getaways, the areas that were more isolated, because that's what James Hilton, I think, and I'm going off what I think James Hilton wanted, but I think that's what James Hilton would have been looking for. You know, a city center is not really a good model for that Himalayan, utopian, remote, isolated area. So if James Hilton used Shangri-La as the inspiration for Shangri-La, like the Chinese government says he did, this would have been a good place for him to come in the old town. So you can see the Buddhist monastery over my shoulder there. We've got another temple over there. So this Buddhist monastery is Tibetan Buddhism, which is really important because that's what James Hilton was writing about. He was writing about a Tibetan Buddhist utopia. So it's really important that the Buddhism is Tibetan. And you can see right behind me in Shangri-La, the old town. This is very much Tibetan Buddhist. And it looks like a pretty standard old town with the narrow streets, cobblestone, pedestrian only. These are a lot of the older streets that you find in China, the hutongs in Beijing. So it does do a pretty good job of replicating the old city. As far as the old town of Shangri-La goes, this is the best place for James Hilton to have come for inspiration. So if I'm going to make the case that Shangri-La or Shangri-La, Yunnan, China, is in fact the Shangri-La from James Hilton's Lost Horizon, the case would be made here. First, I'll introduce where I am. So I'm at Songzanlin Monastery. We're pretty elevated right now. We're about 3,400 meters, so 12,000 feet. This was built in 1679, so that's during the Qing dynasty. Emperor Kangxi is the one who commissioned the building of Songzanlin, and he was also said to be very proud of the monastery, which I guess speaks to the importance of it. So when it was built in 1679, it housed 2,000 Buddhist monks. Now it holds about 700 monks that now call this home. And it's the biggest monastery in Shangri-La. It's the biggest monastery in Yunnan. It's actually one of the biggest Tibetan monasteries in southwest China. It's one of the most important Tibetan Buddhism monasteries in southwest China and in all of China. You can see that this is very much made in Tibetan Buddhism style. So the very distinguishable maroon, white, and gold That's very Tibetan Buddhism. This has actually been called the Little Potala Palace. And if you look at it and you know what the Potala Palace looks like in Lhasa, you can see why. It's very, very, very similar in design to the Potala Palace in Lhasa. Songzanlin Monastery is in Shangrila. I say this, that this is the strongest case for Shangrila being Shangrila, James Hilton Shangrila, is basically for three big reasons. So James Hilton wrote of a Buddhist utopia, and he did so, quote, using Tibetan materials where humans, nature, and animals lived in harmony. So, unquote. So if I think of a Buddhist utopia, a Tibetan Buddhist utopia, it's important that it be Tibetan Buddhism, because that's where James Hilton researching Tibetan materials in the style of Tibetan Buddhism, not Theravada or any other type of Buddhism. So that's important. So when I think of a Tibetan Buddhist utopia, this isn't too far off. The maroons, the golds, the whites, it's an impressive building. The second reason is James Hilton wrote about a Himalayan utopia. Okay, so now it needs to be a utopia elevated and in high altitude surrounded by mountains, something like Machu Picchu, I guess. So I'm at about 3,400 meters right now. So about 12,000 feet. It's high enough to be considered a Himalayan utopia, in my opinion. That's enough elevation. I think anything over 10,000 or 2,500 meters, I think works for a Himalayan utopia. We're also, surrounded by hills. They're not the giant mountains that I would expect to see, but there are hills that surround Songzanlin. So it does have that Himalayan nirvana type vibe. The third reason, James Hilton speaks about a very remote and isolated, excluded from the rest of the world place. Okay, so this sort of has that isolated vibe. There's not a lot around me here. Right now, there's, tons of people, but I'm in China. You can't go anywhere in China without there being tons of people. So forget the people. And he would have been researching documents from two French priests that were writing in the mid-1800s, 1846. So it fits there. So as far as this being remote, it just has that isolated vibe. It has that feeling where you have to, drive 200 miles on a bicycle or a donkey, and then you have to give the elf the magic code to continue, and then you've got to walk through, a tunnel of lava, and then you finally get to this monastery, and then you've got to tell the monk living here the meaning of life, and then you can come in. It's got that kind of excluded, isolated vibe. That gives me the strongest case for Shangrila in Yunnan, China, being the exact location for James Hilton's Shangrila in Lost Horizon. I'll play devil's advocate in another video and explain why I don't think Shangrila is that location. So I wanted to offer my final thoughts on Shangrila. And where is this mysterious utopia? In 2001, the Chinese government officially changed the name of the county of Zhongdian in northwestern Yunnan to Shangrila, or in Chinese, Shangrila. They did this because the Chinese government said undisputedly that this is the location for James Hilton's Shangrila. Others have claimed that it's in Sichuan province. The Songzanlin Monastery, for example. Still others have claimed that it's in southwestern Yunnan. Right now, I'm in Shangrila in northwestern Yunnan. For me, the easiest and most likely answer to where is Shangrila from Lost Horizon, it's fictitious, based on real-world locations. The real-world locations, I think, are the Hunza Valley in Gilgit, Pakistan, northwestern Yunnan, and Tibet. I say this because 2 years before James Hilton wrote Lost Horizon, he went to Hunza Valley. And I've been to Gilgit, Pakistan. It is a Himalayan utopia. The valleys surrounded by intensely tall peaks is just mesmerizing. I say Tibet in northwestern Yunnan because James Hilton himself said that he did years of research using Tibetan materials. In a 1950s interview with James Hilton talks about the difficulties of 1932, and he speaks of living during this time, the greatest financial crisis in modern history, and the instability of the world. Man, Hilton said, was living in a time of crisis. Hilton goes on to say, nowhere on earth was there a place where the storm could be outridden. It was in this mood that I wrote Lost Horizon, and I enjoyed writing it, as one may sometimes consciously enjoy a dream. Also, while researching the book, Hilton himself divulges that he would spend hours in libraries researching Tibetan Buddhist materials. People would come up to him and ask him, "Have you been to Tibet?" He said he hadn't, he still hadn't, and given the way of the world in 1950, he probably never would. So, where is the physical location for James Hilton's Shangrila? I don't know. We'll never know for sure, but it's fun to skip around the world trying to find this Himalayan utopia where humans live in perpetual peace and happiness. This one considered not proven. Well, proven. Out.